about the young girl that you didn't represent, that you helped?
Represented her.
You represented her? Could you tell us a bit more about her case, how you guys helped her?
Well, we got her case, and when she was still detained in Yarnswood, and we did a lot of urgent work over the course of about no more than 2 weeks, because we were worried that they could just remove her. So we wanted to. So we issued a judicial review claim on her behalf, which is a case in the High Court, because we felt that she was being unlawfully detained, and that the way her case had been processed was unlawful because she just hadn't been given a proper opportunity to put her case. So we got an urgent hearing before the court because we said that she shouldn't be in detention, so she should be released. And we got a hearing before the High Court soon after we filed her case in court, at which hearing the High Court judge ordered the Home Office to release her. So we then had it's been quite a long process, because the more we found out about her case, the more we had to kind of, add to the court case. And finally we managed to conclude her judicial review case in the High Court because we felt that she ought to have another chance to demonstrate that she's a refugee before the tribunal, and we managed to get that outcome for her, and there was quite a lot of work that had to be done, and her appeal was finally heard in October, and it was allowed. So she came from somebody who was nearly put on a plane, who was badly represented, then who hopefully, I'd like to think, she got much better representation, and as a result of a lot of the work that we did, and she worked extremely hard as well, to make sure she collected up the evidence that was relevant to her circumstances, what had happened to her. And so we worked together, and we were able to demonstrate to the tribunal that she is in fact a refugee. So it was quite a good outcome. But she was lucky. She was very, very lucky because it was a combination of a High Court judge who granted an injunction for various reasons to stop her being put on a plane, and then which meant that that was before we got involved, which meant that she was still around by the time we found out about her case, and then we got involved and helped her to put her case together in a much better way.
So would you say that maybe working with younger people is a bit, their cases are, they're looked from a judge's point of view, a case of a young person is, I wouldn't want to say ranked higher, but has a higher importance than one of someone who's a bit over the age around 30?
I don't think everybody's case is important, because what you're talking about is, particularly in asylum, because what you're saying is somebody, if they're sent back to their country of origin, they're going to face persecution for whatever reason, whether it's their race, their nationality, their sexuality, their religion, and so on. But I think there are particular circumstances that you have to bear in mind with young people, which heighten their vulnerability in a way perhaps it doesn't for an adult. So they may be more prone to kind of doing what they're told because they're under the control of an agent, or they're more vulnerable to exploitation, obviously, because if they're travelling on their own and they're young, they are, by virtue of their age, much more vulnerable to exploitation. So all those things have to be taken into account a lot more, and their case needs to be looked at a lot more carefully to make sure that they haven't been specifically disadvantaged because they're a young person. And of course there are a lot of young people in the UK who came here at as very young children often, and for various reasons, through no fault of their own, their position in the UK hasn't been regularised, and so they've been living on the margins. But some of them have had family breakdowns, so they've been looked after by local authorities, or not looked after very well by local authorities, who haven't bother to do anything about their immigration status, and often they don't know that they haven't got permission to stay in the UK until they try to get a job or they try to get a place at university, and they have to produce the evidence, and they realise actually there's nothing to show that they have permission to stay in the UK. And for those young people, often the fact that they're unable to work or to go to university also means that, because they're living on the margins of society, they're put in a position where they have no choice really than to kind of engage in criminal activities just to survive. That happens to a lot of other asylum seekers as well, but for young kids it's particularly an issue. And then if they get caught, they get caught up in the criminal justice process, so although for all intents and purposes they're British, they don't have a passport or any bit of paper to say they're British, and often they face being removed to a country that they know nothing about, where they have no connections, they have no contact with their families, often because obviously if the families had contact, the young person probably wouldn't be in that position. And so they faced removal in those circumstances, which is actually very, very difficult for them. So the challenges for lawyers working with those young people are specific, because you've got to try and prove through documentary evidence that somebody's been here for as long as they have, which particularly if they've had quite chaotic childhood, which means they've been moved around, it's quite difficult to establish quickly. So there are specific challenges working with young people, and often, if they have had chaotic childhoods, they've also been through very traumatic experiences, which also will mean that they're vulnerable as adults as well.
Wow. So why would you think that people that have come from countries that have gone through a lot of civil unrest and, like they face prosecution because of their sexuality, their religion, their political affiliation, why do you think they choose to come to the UK? Why specifically London?
I don't think that often they choose. I think often our experience as lawyers is that, agents, they because most people don't have the means to kind of get false passports or tickets or to work out how to get here. And so they rely on agents who kind of, you pay to say, just get me out of here. And often it's the agents who decide where you're going to go. So it's not, and if some people do feel they want to come to UK, maybe because they're English speakers, or maybe there are settled communities from the countries where they come from, which means that it will be easier for them to obtain some level of community support. And often they're from Commonwealth countries with which Britain has historical ties through the empire and so on. So I think there's a range of reasons, not always within the control of the person who ends up here. So I don't think it's as easy as they kind of say, aha, London's fantastic, I'm going to have a really good time. And so they choose to come. When you're scared and you're frightened, all you want to do is not be in that situation. You're not thinking about, this means I must go to London because that's where things will be better for me. Often people don't have that level of control over how they get here.
Wow, so helpful. So, did you have anything you want to ask?
Just talking about, do you know the specific case studies in like different countries? Like, so you get like children from Sri Lanka. Do you get any children from Sri Lanka coming to the UK because of like rape and abductions currently taking place there, which is still going on after the 2009 civil war?
Well, I haven't got any Sri Lankan clients, but I'm aware of families who've come here where they've been subjected to some pretty egregious human rights violations in Sri Lanka, including where the mum has been subjected to very clear and determined sort of subjugation through multiple rape, which obviously is going to impact on the children because the mum is extremely traumatized. So you have a very traumatized family where the dad may also have been detained separately and been subjected to very serious ill treatment in detention, tortured in detention, and so they are then having to cope as a family with young kids as well, and but particularly for asylum seekers, in addition to all those kind of problems that they've experienced in their countries of origin, if they don't have the financial means to support themselves in the UK, they're reliant on asylum support from the government. The government has a legal obligation to support people whilst they're vindicating their claims for asylum or human rights protection. And the level at which that asylum support is paid is very, very low indeed. For single adults, it is £36.62p a week.
Yeah.
For families, it's a bit slightly higher because if you've got children, but it's still a very, very small amount of money to live on, even though people don't have to pay their rent and utility bills. That for a single adult, that £36.62 is to do everything to from your clothes, your mobile phone, your transport, your food. And you have to remember, people will have come with they haven't got flour and oil and salt and sugar and tea bags in their cupboards, and they've got to buy all that from the money they get. So the circumstances in which they have to survive in the UK are also pretty difficult. And if you add to the fact that a lot of those people have gone through very traumatic experiences, it makes it very tough for them to be able to manage on such small sums of money.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
So you may have young adults, if you're over 25, under 30, where you may have gone through a really, really tough time in your country of origin, and then you're having to manage on £36.62, in terms of you can't buy the clothes. If you manage to get some kind of education, a lot of those young people can't afford pen and paper. They can't, if their people at college are saying, let's go for a drink, let's come for a coffee, they find themselves having to just say no because they're too embarrassed to say, well, actually, I can't afford to pay for a cup of coffee. And then people stop asking, so they're very socially isolated. They look different from other people because the clothes they wear are very different from the people around them who are other young people. So it's a very, very difficult situation for a young person to be in.
So a lot of young people that come here on their own, a lot of them have come from traumatic, beyond description experiences in their country of origin. So how do they deal with adapting to life in the UK? Not really how would your company wouldn't really work with them in that sort of social aspect, but how do you think they would cope with the whole trauma?
I think it's very challenging. I came across a young Eritrean man who had fled Eritrea when he was, I think, about 16 years old, and he had gone to Sudan, but he wasn't safe in Sudan, and so the only way he felt that he could be safe is to leave the African continent because there was nowhere else for him to go. So he went to Libya. And he had 2 attempts to get on one of the leaky boats to get to Lampedusa, an island of Sicily. You have seen those stuff in the press about a lot of people, boats sinking in the Mediterranean. And so he had one unsuccessful attempt when the boat nearly sank and they were pushed back onto the coast into Morocco, who deported them back to Libya, and then he went back, and then he came to the UK and was locked up, and they sent him back to Italy, but he was living on the streets and getting food wherever he could, including begging, and then came back to Eritrea, and finally managed to successfully get asylum. By this time, he was about, I think, 25 years old. So he had spent from the age of 16, 9 years of his life simply trying to get away from a very, very difficult situation and to get permission to stay. And he was the most incredibly able, resourceful person who I think will be okay. But I think when you've been through such a tough situation, it takes an enormous amount of resilience and somebody who's pretty damn smart, actually, to have made it here and survived. So I think those people will be quite strong, and I think that I can't think of anyone better than him as a young person to contribute to British society, because he's just so resourceful and so incredibly smart, you know. So there are some really, really bright, clever, amazing young people who come in who, you know, I mean, I